Hey everybody, Billy Obenauer here, continuing our lecture series on Bateman and Konopaske's management textbook. In this unit, chapter 11, we're going to be discussing motivating people. As we move through this unit, we're going to work on understanding principles for setting goals that motivate employees. We're going to go over some examples of how to reward good performance effectively. We're going to describe the key beliefs that affect people's motivation. We're going to talk about how people's individual needs affect their behavior. We're going to define ways to create jobs that motivate. We're going to summarize how people assess and achieve fairness. And then finally, we're going to identify the causes and consequences of employee well-being. We define motivation as the forces that energize, direct, and sustain a person's efforts. Now, as managers, you're going to be responsible for motivating people in a variety of different ways. You want to motivate people to join the organization. That's what recruitment is all about, right? You're not just interviewing people and seeing if you want to hire them, but you're trying to convince them that they want to join you. You have to motivate your people to remain in the organization. So employees are going to have options over the course of their career. They're going to get other job offers, but you want to make sure that they're motivated to be successful with your company. Okay, you want to motivate people to come to work regularly. If somebody wakes up and doesn't feel great or doesn't feel like working and they decide to stay home, that's going to have a negative impact on your business. You're going to motivate people in terms of performance. All right, so you want people to do their best and to be focused on the work that they're doing. And you also are going to try to motivate them to exhibit good citizenship, to be helpful to their colleagues. Now, goal setting theory tells us that goals can be used to motivate people. But in order for goals to be effective at motivating people, they have to be crafted in such a way that people understand what it is they need to do. Okay, so because of that, we need to have specific goals for our employees. All right, the goals also have to be challenging to our employees. They have to be a little bit difficult. Now, we don't want them to be too difficult. We don't want them to be so difficult that our employees can't achieve the goals, but they need to be difficult enough that they do provide some type of challenge. Okay, because if there is no challenge present, then they're not going to motivate our employees because our employees won't have to do anything to achieve the goals. All right, and then finally, we need to provide feedback as to how our employees are performing in relation to the goal. Now, feedback can come in a variety of different ways. It may be the manager communicating with the employee. It could also be a system where the employees can see their progress and track their progress. But either way, our employees need to understand how they're performing in relation to the goals. They do need feedback. Goals can also be more motivating when they appeal to somebody's higher values. For example, people are more motivated by ideas like saving the world or helping others than they are about making extra money for the company. Okay? You'll also often hear people refer to SMART goals when you're in industry. And when we're talking about SMART goals, this is an acronym. The first part of it is specific. Okay, like we said before, the goals need to be clear to our employees. All right. Second, they need to be measurable. All right, so we need to know if we've hit the goals or not. So a goal like, I want you to do good work is not measurable because what is good? What does that mean? All right, I want you to have good sales. Well, what are good sales? I want you to achieve $2 million in net sales this year. That's measurable. We can tell if we did that or not. All right, the goal needs to be achievable. All right, if you set a goal that is not achievable, people aren't going to work towards it. Okay, so I want you to achieve world peace. Well, most people aren't going to feel like they can do something like that. All right, or if you tell a salesperson that you want them to achieve $100 million in sales, but the most that somebody's ever achieved before is $20 million, they might not feel like $100 million is achievable. All right, the goal should be results-based. Okay, sometimes you'll see the R as reasonable. Okay, but reasonable is really achievable, right? So here we're looking at results-based. So in the end, we're looking at what is the outcome. We're not looking at what is the process, all right? So we can continue to look at what that outcome is. And then finally, it should be time-specific. Okay, sometimes people say timely for this one. But by time-specific, what we mean is you have a very specific amount of time to complete your goal in. Maybe you have a week, maybe you have a month, maybe you have a year, whatever the amount of time is. It doesn't necessarily matter what that amount of time is, as long as it's not too far. We don't want to give you a goal for 20 years from now, but if you have a specific amount of time to achieve your goal, then you're going to work to achieve your goal during that time. One type of goal that can really be motivating for our people is called a stretch goal. And a stretch goal is a goal where we give somebody a target that's a little beyond what they're used to doing. Okay, and there are two types of stretch goals here, and I call this Plastic Man's rule of stretch goals. Okay, and the first type of stretch goal that we have is something called a horizontal stretch goal. Okay, so you can see here Plastic Man is becoming something else. He's becoming a jack in the box. Now, if we have a horizontal stretch goal, we might do something here where we have our employees do something that's a little bit outside of their comfort zone. So if we're training somebody to be a manager and maybe they haven't handled incoming deliveries before, maybe they haven't dealt with different types of manifests, we might give them some tasks in these areas that they haven't worked in and give them some goals about becoming proficient in these areas. And that would be an example of a horizontal stretch goal. Now, we also have something called a vertical stretch goal, okay? And here what you see is Plastic Man is kind of stretching a little bit further. And with a vertical stretch goal, basically what we're asking our employees to do is to keep doing what they've been doing in the past, but just do it better, okay? So improve your efficiency, improve your effectiveness, all right? So if somebody's working on sales, maybe we give them a higher sales target. If somebody's in operations, maybe we give them a more efficient target to work with. But essentially with a vertical stretch goal, what we're looking to do is we're looking to just take what you've been doing, but do it a little better. Now, as you probably gathered from the previous slides, goals can be a really powerful tool in terms of motivating people. All right, but we have to be very cognizant of how we're structuring our goals. So if we need people to work together, if we need them to work as a team, we shouldn't be setting individual goals. All right, if we have individual goals for people working in a team setting, then we're going to create competition instead of cooperation. Okay, we also want to make sure we understand what type of productivity we need. If we have different goals for different types of productivity, that can help us meet multiple objectives. If we only have one goal, but we need multiple things from our people, people may focus on the one goal that they have while neglecting other important areas of performance. Now, you also want to set goals for yourself, and you want to set these goals in different stages, okay? And I do this for myself with my research. I'll set more long-term goals about what it is that I look to achieve over several years. I'll set kind of more mid-distant goals that might be where I want to be in about a year or two on certain projects. And then I'll set shorter-term goals that might look at what I'm going to do over the next month or so, okay? And by having different goals at different stages, what I allow myself to do is I allow myself to lay out a path where I continue to move forward in the direction that I want to go. And if you set goals for yourself like this, then you won't find yourself in a position where all of a sudden you've achieved all your goals and you're like, oh my gosh, what do I do now? Or where your goals are so far off that you feel like you're not even working towards them. Setting goals in different stages allows you to be productive and feel productive while continuing to move forward and following the trajectory that you want to follow. Now, Thorndike's law of effect basically says that if a behavior is followed by a positive consequence, that behavior is going to be repeated. All right, so maybe you think about a behavior like telling a joke. And if you tell the joke and people laugh and they smile, then you're going to want to tell more jokes. Because that laughter, those smiles, they're what we call reinforcers, okay? A positive consequence that motivates future behaviors. So you tell a joke, people laugh, the laughter is a reinforcer, and it motivates you to tell another joke. All right, and this idea of reinforcers contributes to our understanding of organizational behavior modification, or the application of reinforcement theory in organizational settings. You might be wondering, what exactly is reinforcement theory? Well, when you think about reinforcement theory, think about operant conditioning. Think about B.F. Skinner. What Skinner did was Skinner worked with animals in a lab. And what he did was he tried to train animals to do different things by rewarding behaviors. So, for example, one of Skinner's most famous experiments, he tried to teach a pigeon to do a 360-degree turn. And what happened was every time the pigeon turned away from him a little bit, he gave the pigeon a reward. And then what happened was those turns got bigger And with the bigger turns, you get bigger rewards until ultimately the pigeon turned all the way in a circle. All right, and that's the idea behind reinforcement theory, is that when we want to elicit a specific behavior, we reward that behavior every time we see it, so the behavior begins to come about naturally. Now, there are four different types of consequences that can emerge when we're trying to reinforce behavior. I'm going to talk about them within an organizational setting. So the first is a positive reinforcement. And this is where we give somebody something positive in response to a behavior. So maybe if an employee makes a really good sale, maybe we give them tickets to a basketball game for that weekend. Okay, and that kind of encourages them to make a sale like that again in the future. All right, the second is negative reinforcement. And with negative reinforcement, what we do is we take away something that's bad. So maybe people have specific types of paperwork that they don't like to do. And in response to a positive behavior, we say, hey, you know that paperwork you have to do tonight? Don't worry about it. I'm going to get somebody to take care of that for you. That would be an example of negative reinforcement. Then we have punishment. And punishment is where we administer an adverse consequence. Okay, so maybe what we see is a negative behavior on the part of the employee, and because of that, they get written up, or they get a written warning or a verbal warning, or something of that nature. That would be an example of punishment. And then finally, we have extinction. And with extinction, we basically don't provide a consequence. We essentially don't interact in response to the behavior with the hope that the lack of a consequence is going to prevent the employee from repeating the behavior. Okay, so if we see somebody makes a sale at a really low margin, it's a sale we would prefer not to have made, what we do is we don't acknowledge the sale. Okay, we simply provide no reinforcement. And the hope is that the lack of reinforcement is going to give them essentially all the information that they need in determining future behavior. This map here lays out some more ways that we might see positive and negative reinforcement and extinction and punishment emerge within an organization. And what you'll notice when you look at the map here is you'll notice that the positive reinforcement and the negative reinforcement tend to go along with positive behaviors, and the extinction and punishment tend to go along with negative behaviors. Okay, so in this example, a coworker is making a sales presentation, and if we're on the top side where it's effective, the manager may engage in positive reinforcement by saying good job, or they may engage in negative reinforcement simply by not criticizing the presentation. If it's a poor presentation, they may engage in extinction where basically they don't provide any feedback, or they may engage in punishment where they reprimand the person and say, you know, you really didn't do a good job there, or you weren't prepared for that presentation. So those are some more examples of how consequences can emerge in the workplace. So managers really need to be careful about the types of behavior they reinforce and how they reinforce this behavior. And I'll give you an example here, because sometimes we can reinforce the wrong behaviors and not realize that that's what we're doing. So imagine that you are the manager of a retail store, and the retail store closes at 9 o'clock at night. Okay, now typically you allot an hour for employees to close the store, so they should be out by 10 o'clock. All right, but the supervisor who was working last night, they really try to work very hard to get the store closed early. They get everybody out by 9:20. Okay, so because they got everybody out by 9:20, maybe there were 8 employees there, you cut over a half an hour of labor for each one, so you actually cut 4 to 5 hours off of your payroll. Okay, so that's good. So as a manager, you go up to that supervisor and you say, hey, great job. You did a really good job getting the crew out early last night. That's awesome. Saved us some payroll. Thank you. Okay, it seems on the surface like you might be reinforcing a positive behavior. But what if they cut corners to get out that early? All right, so instead of closing up the store properly, maybe they didn't clean up properly, maybe they didn't do all their paperwork, and that was all left for the opening manager. Okay, now what you've done by positively reinforcing that behavior is you've actually reinforced the negative behavior. You've actually reinforced cutting corners. You've actually reinforced not doing the paperwork or not cleaning up. So we want to be very careful as managers what behaviors we choose to reinforce. Now, here's a list of behaviors that you would want to reward in the workplace. Now, I'm not going to go through these one by one because you can all read through this list just fine yourselves. But what I want you to notice as you go through this list is notice that some of the behaviors here that we should be rewarding aren't the ones that we're always rewarding. So, for example, the third one down here looks at creativity instead of mindless conformity. All right, how often do we reward people for doing what's always been done? Okay, how often do we punish people actually for doing something new, for doing something creative? I can tell you honestly, as an educator, I'm bringing new things into my work all the time. And when I first started, I was often very concerned about that because people would ask me what I was doing in the classroom, and I would tell them, and I would get some looks that maybe some of my colleagues, maybe some of my peers didn't quite agree with what I was doing, and it made me hesitate in terms of being creative. Okay, it made me structure my classes a lot like how other people structured them. And it took a little while before I finally felt confident to apply creativity in my job. All right. Similarly, we look at quietly effective behavior instead of squeaky wheels. Now, if you think about this, often people who make a big deal about a problem in the workplace and how they fixed it, how they solved all these problems that other people created, often we reward them, okay? We tell them, hey, good job. We make a big deal about the great job that they did. While off to the side, we have other people who are solving problems, doing it quietly, not making a big deal, and we're not reinforcing their behavior at all. So these are some of the examples of what we want to consider when we're thinking about what should and shouldn't be rewarded in the workplace. Now, you might be sitting here wondering, okay, we've heard about positive behaviors. What do we do about negative behaviors? Should we punish our employees? And, a lot of people have different viewpoints on this. When I was in my MBA program, I had a friend in the program who, every time we were faced with a case and an employee had done something wrong, he'd be like, we need to punish them. We need to punish them. But the reality is that punishment isn't always good. Okay, so when people are doing something that is serious, when they violate the law, when there's ethical issues, if they create a safety hazard, then punishment might be appropriate. Okay, because these are some behaviors that we absolutely cannot tolerate within the organization, and we need to make sure that that's communicated effectively. But we have to be careful about what we punish. All right, because if we punish too much, we're going to create a culture of fear. People aren't going to want to come into work. We're going to have high turnover. Okay, nobody wants to work in an environment where they're always afraid that they're going to get in trouble. So you have to be very careful and use punishment when it's necessary. Use punishment in serious cases, like dealing with important policies, with safety issues, law violations, things of that nature. But when it comes down to the smaller things, those are where we really want to focus more on training and teaching than on punishment. One of the important aspects of reinforcement is providing ongoing feedback. Now, as managers, we're not always very good at this. We provide our employees with their annual reviews. If they do something really good, we might provide feedback. If they do something really bad, we might provide feedback. But what about all those other times where they're just kind of somewhere in the middle? Okay, our employees work 5 days a week. They work 52 weeks a year. There are a lot of opportunities for us to provide feedback on their behaviors. And the more often we provide little feedback, the more we're going to be able to shape their behavior and avoid having any of those situations where we really need to take corrective action. Okay, so we need to, as managers, work to provide more ongoing feedback, and particularly when we notice that something is trending in the wrong direction, we want to make sure we fix that. So for example, as an educator, if I notice somebody's not doing their work routinely, I'll reach out to them before we get to our first exam because I don't want them to fail the first exam. I want them to do their work. I want them to study. I want them to learn the material, and I want them to do better, right? So we want to do the same things as managers. If you see somebody who has a small little modification that they could make to a behavior, maybe they have something in their sales pitch that's off just a little bit, or maybe they keep making the same mistake on a piece of machinery. Don't wait for there to be a major problem. Provide the small feedback, have the teaching moment, alter the behavior, and move forward. Now, all the feedback that we give our employees isn't going to work if people don't believe that their effort is going to result in the outcomes that they desire. All right? And this is where we talk about expectancy theory. And what expectancy theory basically says is that if you put effort, you're going to perform well. And if you perform well, you're going to receive an outcome that you desire. Okay? Now, the relationship between effort and performance is something that we call expectancy. All right? And the question there is, how confident am I that my effort will lead to good performance? Now, think about yourself. Have you ever studied for an exam and then not performed well on the exam? And you kind of say, hey, you know what? Studying didn't work. Okay? I don't believe it's worth my time because I didn't perform well. And then the next exam comes and you don't study. Okay? And this is why when I talk to students about studying, we spend a lot more time talking about how to study than how much to study, because I need my students to believe that their effort is going into the right place so that the energy they put in is going to be rewarded. All right, then next, we look at the relationship between performance and outcome. All right, and this relationship is impacted by something called instrumentality. All right, where people think about, will my good performance be rewarded with desired outcomes? All right, so think about a top performing employee who never gets promoted. After a while, they feel like they're never going to get the outcome that they want, and they stop trying to perform so well. All right, that's an example of the impact of instrumentality. Now, according to expectancy theory, for something to be motivating, expectancy needs to be high. All right, what that means is that people need to believe that their effort is going to lead to good performance. Instrumentality needs to be high. People need to believe that their good performance is going to lead to an outcome. All right, and valence also needs to be positive and high. Okay, so the outcome needs to be something that you care about. All right, imagine the outcome for a task was a lifetime supply of dog poop. You probably would not be too excited about that. That would have a low valence, not going to be very motivating. Okay? If the outcome, however, was $2 billion, you might be a little more interested in that. All right? So expectancy needs to be high. We need to believe that effort will lead to performance. Instrumentality needs to be high. We need to believe that performance will lead to an outcome. And valence of the outcome needs to be high. We need to believe that the outcome is something that we desire. And if those three are all high, then motivation should be high as well. So as managers, how can we use expectancy theory to help motivate our employees? Well, for starters, we can increase expectancies. Okay, so we need to figure out, if our people don't believe that their effort is going to lead to performance, why don't they believe that? Is there something that we can teach them that can help strengthen the relationship between effort and performance? So just like I talked about with studying, where I try to make sure people are studying in a way that's going to be effective, as managers, we may see that somebody's working really hard, but that they're not doing something in the most effective way. So if we teach them how to do it in a more effective way, we can strengthen that relationship between effort and performance, and we can increase expectancies. Okay, we need to identify positively valent outcomes. Okay, we can't assume that we know what our employees want. We need to talk to them. We need to make sure that the rewards, that the outcomes are something that they desire. Okay, and then we need to make performance instrumental towards positive outcomes. So if there's not a relationship between performance and outcomes, we need to figure out why that is. If our top performers aren't getting bonuses, if our top performers aren't getting promoted, then of course we're going to have weak instrumentality. All right, so we need to make sure that our top performers are receiving the outcomes that they desire. Now, related to outcome balance, next we're going to talk about content theories. Content theories basically say that people have different needs that they need to satisfy, and we're going to talk about three different theories here. We'll talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, Alderfer's ERG theory, and McClelland's need structure. Now, Maslow's hierarchy basically says that we have 5 different sets of needs, and that they have an order, that one need needs to be met before we're worried about the next. So we have to meet our physiological needs first, according to Maslow. That means basically our physical needs need to be met. Okay, so we might need sleep, we might need to eat, and so on. And then once those needs are met, then we can worry about things like safety and security. And when our needs related to safety and security are met, then we can worry about our social needs, okay, our needs related to belongingness. Okay, then after those needs are met, we can worry about things like esteem and how we feel about ourselves. And then finally, self-actualization, or kind of like our higher order needs. Okay, now Maslow said, again, that we have to meet those needs at the bottom before we can worry about the needs at the top. And over here I have a little joke that basically that kind of means, like, if you're being chased by a bear and you're not very safe, that you're going to be thinking, oh my gosh, I can't believe I missed breakfast. I'm so hungry. Well, obviously because of this, you can imagine there are going to be some circumstances where the order and the priority of needs are going to change, right? If you're being chased by a bear and you're not safe, you're probably not so much worried about getting enough sleep or having breakfast, okay? But ultimately what Maslow was getting at was that we have priorities, and until one priority is met, we don't really move on to the next. Now, Maslow's hierarchy is very interesting because it helps us identify needs that people have, and to think about them in terms of how we're going to prioritize these needs. It's very intuitive, and you need to be familiar with Maslow's hierarchy because a lot of managers are going to talk about it, a lot of people in organizations are going to talk about it. But the most important thing that I want you to remember about Maslow's hierarchy of needs is that it lacks research support. Okay, so there's very little support out there for the actual hierarchy, the actual order that he puts needs in. All right, you need to know this because if you're going out there and making business decisions based upon these needs and the order of these needs, you may be doing so based upon bad information. All right, we don't have good science that supports Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the ERG theory looks at how needs motivate people as well. Okay, ERG theory, however, groups needs a little bit differently. Okay, it essentially takes the safety and physiological needs from Maslow's hierarchy and groups them as what we call existence needs. Then it has relatedness needs, which essentially group esteem and social needs from Maslow's hierarchy. And then we would look at growth needs, which relate to self-actualization from Maslow's hierarchy. Now, McClelland looked at needs a little bit differently from Maslow or the ERG theory. McClelland said that managers were motivated by three different types of needs. The first of them is achievement. And according to McClelland, managers who were high on the need for achievement really sought out to meet specific goals. Okay, meeting these goals and accomplishing things really is what drives managers who are high on the need for achievement. Then there are managers who are high on the need for affiliation. And these managers really have a need to draw connections with people. Okay, they have a need to develop friendships and kinships and to be liked by others. Okay, and then finally, there are managers who are high on a need for power. Okay, and they want to have influence and control over people. And when we say they want to have influence and control, basically what we mean is they want to be able to get people to do things that they wouldn't ordinarily do. And that's what motivates managers who are high on the need for power. Now, as we discussed before, the research support for needs theories does vary a little bit. But whichever needs theory you subscribe to, it's important to remember that needs can vary by culture as well. In some countries, achievement is more important than others. In some countries, belongingness is a priority, more so than in other countries. So if you're in an organization where you're trying to build motivational strategies based upon people's needs, it's important to remember that these strategies may vary in effectiveness based upon where you're located or what business unit you're in. It's also important to remember that needs can vary by the individual. Now, earlier in the lesson, we talked a little bit about reinforcers, and there's two different types of reinforcers that we're going to talk about here on this slide. The first one is an extrinsic reward. And with an extrinsic reward, essentially what happens is someone within the organization gives you some type of reward for the job you're doing. So you may get, a certain bonus, you may get some type of perk like airline tickets or a bigger office. But those are all examples of an extrinsic reward, where basically you try to perform good work and then someone gives you a reward as a result of that work. Then we also have intrinsic rewards, and these are rewards that you really get yourself. Okay, so you might feel good about the work that you're doing. You might be internally motivated to do this work. So, for example, when I perform research, when I engage in research, a lot of times engaging in the research process and uncovering new knowledge is something that I find a lot of value in, and that would be an intrinsic reward to me. Now, as managers, as we're trying to motivate our employees, we may also look at the work that they're doing and try to see how we can change or modify that work. One way we can do that is through something called job rotation, where we give people different jobs that they can perform. So maybe they rotate out onto a different position once a week. When I was a manager, I used to actually schedule people to work outside of their job area, outside of their department once a week. And this was part of an exercise to help train people and provide a little more flexibility for the organization. But it also helped to motivate people because they were learning new skills, they were becoming more valuable, and they appreciated that. They enjoyed engaging in rotation. Okay, we may also look at job enlargement where people get additional tasks to kind of keep them from getting bored. So as a retail manager, I often looked beyond just the basic jobs of the cashier for what we had our cashiers do. So I would try to tell my cashiers, you know what? You have this whole area of the store, this little section, and I want you to focus on making sure this section looks good, right? So if there's product that's out of stock, I want you to own having that product be in stock in this area and give them additional tasks related to that. So when they weren't busy in their traditional cashier duties, they had other things that they could do in their jobs. That's an example of job enlargement. And then we have job enrichment, where we basically will add to a job, but in a more meaningful way. So we may give people some decision-making authority in the work that they do. We may give them some more responsibility in some way, shape, or form. That's an example of job enrichment. Now, Herzberg looked at a lot of the factors related to work that we've talked about here today and developed something that we call the motivation hygiene theory or the two-factor theory. Okay, and basically at the core of Herzberg's theory was a different conceptualization of job satisfaction. Traditionally, people had thought of satisfaction and dissatisfaction being opposite ends of the same scale. And Herzberg said, no, I don't really think that's it. I think people can be satisfied or they can lack satisfaction. They can be dissatisfied or they can lack dissatisfaction. All right, so Herzberg's basic idea here was just because you're not satisfied, just because you have an absence of satisfaction, doesn't mean that you're dissatisfied. And he said there's different things that feed satisfaction and dissatisfaction. Okay, and things called hygiene factors, they feed dissatisfaction. Okay, so pay, company policies, working conditions, those types of things. People expect those. And if they're present, they're not going to be dissatisfied. But if they're not present, they might be dissatisfied, right? So if you get paid really poorly, you're going to be dissatisfied. But according to Herzberg, being paid really well isn't going to make you satisfied. It's just going to keep you from being dissatisfied. So those are hygiene factors. And then we have motivators. Okay, motivators are the things that feed our satisfaction. Okay, so sometimes getting additional job responsibilities, feeling responsible for the work that we do, feeling a sense of ownership, growth, being recognized. Those are things that, according to Herzberg, are going to be motivators because they feed our job satisfaction. Now, Hackman and Oldham looked at how work is done, and they developed the job characteristics model, which basically identifies 5 different ways that managers can structure work to make it more motivating. Now, the first component of the job characteristics model, or JCM, that they identified is skill variety. And skill variety is related to the job rotation or job enlargement that we talked about earlier. Because skill variety is all about having different job activities in different areas of work so that people aren't doing the same thing all day. Now, there are some companies where people work in factories, they might just pull the same lever all day for 8 hours. Now, according to the job characteristics model, that would make a job very unmotivating. Whereas if somebody had to engage in a lot of different activities, skill variety, that would make the job more motivating. Okay, then they looked at task identity. Task identity is the second component here, and this basically says you complete a whole identifiable piece of work. Okay, so I come from the building trades industry. If you think about this, we had some builders who would build a house from the foundation all the way through the entire process until somebody was in the home. They'd have higher task identity than somebody who just came in and did one part of the house. And according to Hackman and Oldham, if you built that entire house and saw the completion of the entire project, that would be a little more motivating than just doing a portion of it. Then we have task significance. Okay, what's the impact that your work is having on the lives of others? All right, so maybe a doctor who is saving lives might have higher task significance than someone who's in a job that makes less of an impact on humanity. All right, then we have autonomy, the ability to make decisions in your job, and feedback. Managers giving feedback to their employees, giving them information and insight into how well they're doing their work. And together, those 5 dimensions make up the job characteristics model of motivation. Now, Hackman and Oldham said that these 5 core dimensions of the job are going to influence a variety of factors, such as how employees perceive the meaningfulness of the work they're doing, their perceived responsibility for the outcome of their job, and even how much they know about the results of the work that they're doing. And then these factors are going to in turn influence a variety of outcomes within the workplace, such as the employee's internal work motivation, the quality of the work that they perform, their satisfaction with the work, and even how often they come to work and whether or not they stay at a job. Another way that we can make work more motivating is to empower our employees. And what we mean by empowering is giving them some of the power in the decision-making processes. Now, empowerment becomes a big buzzword these days, okay? And we hear a lot of people talking about empowering employees, but empowerment can backfire, okay? And when it can backfire is when you say that you're empowering people, but you don't actually give them the power to make decisions. So, for example, if you tell people they can make decisions and do work the way they want to do it, but then you punish them if they make a decision that's different from what you would have done, or you punish them if their decision doesn't work, then they're going to be afraid to make decisions on their own. They're going to want to make sure you buy into the decision-making process before they do something. So if we're going to fully empower our employees and gain motivation through empowerment, what we have to do is we have to give people permission to make mistakes. Okay, we have to let people fail. We have to allow them to fail, or else they're not going to be truly empowered. Now, one of my favorite theories when it comes to employee motivation is equity theory. And equity theory basically says that people look at what they put into their job and what they get out of their job, and they compare that ratio to what happens for other people. Okay, so if someone views that they put as much work into their job as their coworker does, but their coworker gets paid more than they do, then they view that as inequitable. If someone views themselves putting a lot more work into their job than their coworker, but their pay is equal, then they might consider that inequitable. Essentially, people expect to get the same outputs for the same work as the people that they work with. But when we look at equity theory, people aren't only comparing themselves to their colleagues. They're not only comparing themselves to people they view as their equals. They're also comparing themselves to others within the organization. They're comparing themselves to their bosses or their supervisors, and they're comparing themselves to others in other companies. Okay, and managers need to take all this into consideration and develop fair ways of compensating their employees based upon these comparisons. So people are going to be looking across division, across units, and across companies, and managers need to figure out how it is that they're going to compensate their people fairly, but also rationally explain when there are differences so they don't demotivate their employees. Because ultimately, if people view these relationships as inequitable, they're going to find ways to try to make them equitable. The most common way that employees try to resolve issues of inequity is they reduce their inputs. So they say, okay, I'm just not going to work as hard. I'm not getting paid as much as I should, so I'm not going to work as hard. The other thing they might do is they might try to make other people's jobs a little more difficult, to make other people increase their inputs. So, hey, they get paid the big bucks, I'm going to make them work for it. Okay? They could also look to try to decrease other people's outcomes. I've worked in organizations where people actually complained about my division's pay and tried to get our pay reduced. Okay, they weren't successful, but they put a lot of pressure out there to try to make it happen, And for all we know, it could have influenced our annual raises. We might have gotten smaller annual raises as a result of this. Okay, and they also can try to increase their outcomes. Now, the most common way that they'll try to increase their outcomes is they might ask for a raise. They might ask for an increase in pay. But sometimes people will also resort to deviant behavior to increase their outcomes. So they may resort to things like time theft or actual theft. You know, I have a little joke down here, if you remember the old McDonald's character, the Hamburglar, he was always trying to steal hamburgers from McDonald's. And I joke, what if the Hamburglar was just an employee who felt like he was treated unfairly? Okay, now I'm joking in this sense, but this does actually happen. Okay, sometimes it's not things that we think of as outright theft, but it might be somebody taking office supplies and saying, you know what, I work a lot harder than they pay me for, so I don't have a problem taking this. Now, I'm not saying that's right. That is not the right thing to do. But this is how people justify that type of behavior when there are perceived equity issues. Now, everything that we just talked about with equity theory really refers to a concept that we would call distributive justice. And this is the idea that we have fairness in distributing rewards. Okay, so is the outcome that I received comparable or fair to the outcome received by somebody else? Now, there are other factors that people consider, though, when they think about fairness or equity. They also consider interpersonal justice. All right, so was I treated well? Was I treated fairly? Okay, so even though I may not have liked the process or the outcome, did you treat me with kindness? And then finally, one of the major components that we'll look at here in justice is procedural justice. So did we get to this outcome fairly? So if you think about two people who are fired, if one person makes one mistake and is fired right away, and another person makes a similar mistake but they get a series of warnings before being fired, then there might be perceptions that there's a lack of procedural justice because we went through two different procedures to get to the same outcome for two different people. Okay, so together, procedural justice, interpersonal justice, and distributive justice form the three different arms of justice, of organizational justice, that our employees are concerned with. Now, all these factors contribute to our employees' well-being, and we should care about our employees' well-being because that's the right thing to do. But sometimes people don't always do that. Sometimes they think about, well, what are the business outcomes associated with well-being? So let's think about some of the consequences of our employees having high job dissatisfaction. Okay, when job dissatisfaction is high, we have higher turnover and absenteeism, less good citizenship within the organization, more problems such as grievances and lawsuits. We may be at risk of having employees go out on strike. We can have all sorts of different types of negative behaviors such as stealing and sabotage. Our people can be in poor mental and physical health. This is part of what contributes to the higher absenteeism that we talked about before. Can also contribute to more injuries in the workplace. Our employees may not treat our customers well if they're dissatisfied, and all these factors together can help lead to lower productivity and lower profitability. So it's very important that we try to keep our employees from being dissatisfied. Now, the negative outcomes associated with employee dissatisfaction have led many organizations to adopt quality of work-life programs. And the idea behind these QWL programs, as they're called, is that essentially employers want to work to reduce dissatisfaction in the workplace with the hopes that this is going to help improve organizational effectiveness and productivity. And on the next slide, we're going to talk about the 8 different categories associated with quality of work-life programs. QWL programs work to address adequate and fair compensation, a safe and healthy work environment, jobs that develop human capacities, a chance for growth and security, a social environment that fosters personal identity, freedom from prejudice, and a sense of community and upward mobility, constitutionalism, or the rights of personal privacy, dissent, and due process, a work role that minimizes infringement on personal leisure and family needs, and socially responsible organizational actions. One important aspect of motivating our employees is to avoid breaking their expectations by violating any types of implied agreements that we may have. These implied agreements are often referred to as psychological contracts. And a psychological contract is basically a shared set of expectations between two people or two groups of people. Okay, so for example, employers may expect employees to be loyal to the organization, and in turn, employees may expect to have some sense of job security. Okay, it's very important as managers that we understand what these psychological contracts look like, because if our employees have expectations and we're not meeting those expectations, they're going to view us as violating the psychological contract, and that's going to decrease their motivation. As a final note, be sure to empower people so they feel like they can do their jobs. If we go back to expectancy theory, if people feel like no matter how much effort they put into their job, they're not going to be successful, they're going to have decreased motivation. So if our employees feel like they don't have the power to do their jobs and do their jobs right, they're not going to be motivated to put in effort and energy because they're not going to believe that they can perform their jobs well. Thank you so much for joining me here for this lesson. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you learned something. This is Billy Obenauer here saying we'll talk to you soon.